Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Our topic for tonight is numbers and counting. And we're going to have sort of three kinds of commentary. First of all, we're going to go through, not all, but several Oklahoma Indian languages and see what the basic numbers are and how the system works, and see what the different numbers mean. Sometimes you can break down the meaning within the name of a specific number. And then we're also going to notice how some of these numbers are based on each other, as in English 13 has a relation to 3 and to 10. There are similar relations in other languages, but not always having to do with the tens. Sometimes the base is 3 or 5 or some other number. And we're going to see if we can conclude anything about people and culture and so forth from all this. Let's start out with English, the English language, just so we can see what I mean by a number system having some kind of system to it. It's just not an arbitrary listing of names for things. In English, and we'll try to show each of our displays for the different languages in a similar pattern so you can kind of think of the comparison a little more easily. We have the numbers 1 through 10 are all specific numbers not really related to each other in any way that we can see. So we have a number for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Each of them is quite distinct from the others. Then when you get into the teens, we come to 11, and if we knew more about the history of English, maybe we would understand how that's related to the number 1 or to something else in the history of English. I can't really tell you. But when we get into the farther up in the teens, you can see the relationships more easily. 12, mostly because of the spelling, we can suspect is related to 2. 13 is clearly related to 3 plus 10. It's sort of like you're saying 310, 410, 510, except there are slight phonetic pronunciation differences between the basic number and the number as it occurs in the teens. But this goes on up, of course, through 16, 17, 18, and 19, and there's a clear relationship of the single digit to the teen number. Then we have our 20s, 30s, and 40s, the decades, and those are clearly related to these simplest numbers under 10 as well. So we have 20, which is related to 2, 30, which is related to 3, 40, which is related to 4, 50, which is related to 5, and so on, down through 90, which is related to 9. And I think the fact that our number system works this way, that has this kind of patterning to it, makes it easier for kids to learn their numbers than if we had, 99 completely distinct numbers to get up to 100. It would take a lot longer to learn your numbers. But because there is this kind of system, once you know how it works, once you know that you go 21, 22, 23, of course you get for free the fact that you go 31, 32, 33, 41, 42, 43, 51, 52, 53. So you can kind of catch on to the pattern and save yourself a lot of trouble in learning a system like this. And I think that's why usually numbering and counting in any human language is usually going to have some kind of system like this to it. Now you might assume that it would always be that 1 through 10 are one set of numbers and that the teens would be based on that and the decades would be based on that, but it's not that simple. There actually are other options that languages may use, and we can see various examples in Oklahoma languages. Let me go to our first Oklahoma language. So let's look at Comanche. Now in Comanche, I'll just pronounce the numbers for you first. And these are the digits here. We'll show you what they mean. Summa for 1, Wahata for 2, Pahita, Hayaroqueta, Maoveta, Navaita, Tatsakuta, Namiwatsakuta, Wumnat, and Sumar. Now there are a few interesting things we can see about the Comanche. They're not within just these 10. Some of them are not terribly obvious. You might want to take my word for them. But one thing I know, a native speaker once told me that this word hayaroqueta literally means all in a row or something like that. And I think it has to do with the fact that probably the associated hand gesture was something like this, as we usually do in English. So you have all of your fingers just lined up in a row, and so it got that name. The word ma'oveta, notice that most of these end in t, which is a kind of verbal ending usually. Ma'oveta ends in the t, then there's this extra little syllable here, which I don't quite understand. And then the beginning of it, though, is ma'o. That's what I wanted to draw your attention to. Ma'o by itself would mean hand. And of course, if you just show your whole hand, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in a number of languages around the world, you'll find that the word for 5 is related to the word for hand. And this is one of those examples. Now, if we move up to 6, Navaita actually, I think, bears some relationship to the word for 3. If you'll think about it, 6 is twice 3. And this bahita and the latter part of this word bahita is very similar, and the slight pronunciation differences are not unexpected in Comanche. I don't know exactly why this prefix na would be on it. I think this is probably an ancient relationship that native speakers are not even particularly aware of today. But just as you know, 12 and 2 in English are related, although you don't quite hear the sound of 2 within the word 12. I think bahita and navaita are related, so 3 and 6 are related in Comanche. 7 and 8 are very long, complex-looking words, and I've never met up with anybody who can explain what they mean, break them down further. I don't know, and I've studied a number of languages that have unusual numbers for 7, 8, and or 9. When you get to 9 in Comanche, though, wumnata, that literally means something lacking. And so I think the idea here is that there's this number 10 that we're kind of working up to as we count 1 to 10. And if you go to 10 but back off 1, or if you have 10 lacking 1, then that's 9. So wumnata literally means lacking, but it's used for the number 9. And then se'amar is the number 10, which looks somewhat similar to 1, and I'm not sure if that's coincidence or what. But so there's something more going on in the numbers 1 through 10 in Comanche than there is in English, and that's already kind of interesting. Let's look at the teens for a minute, too. In the teens, I'll just pronounce the first 5. Suma matoikat, waha matoikat, bahi matoikat, hayarokwe matoikat, I ran out of room there, and mo'o matoikat. These literally mean, respectively, 1 on top of it, the it being the 10, I think. So it's, in fact, you can say, if you want to say these numbers more fully, you can say se'amara, suma matoikat, se'amara, waha matoikat. So we really, the idea, sometimes this word, the 10 word is dropped from it, because it makes such a long expression if you include it. But the idea is that this is 1 on top of 10, 2 on top of 10, 3 on top of 10, and you can see the summa, wahata, waha is a shorter form of that, bahita, pahi is a shorter form of 3, hayarokwe is a shorter form of 4, and so on. So the teens are all very logical and systematic in Comanche, and they're clearly related to the single-digit numbers, as in English, but even more so. And it's by way of saying that it's so many on top of 10. And then when you get to the decades, we have wahamara for 20, pahimara for 30. You just about see that wahata and that pahita in there, minus the little ending. Hayarokwe se'amara. That's right, I think. Hayarokwe se'amara. In these, there's a slight irregularity here. These two are sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're shortened forms. The idea is that each of these consists of one of these digits plus the se'amara. So you're saying something like 2 tens, 3 tens, 4 tens, 5 tens. But these two forms are somewhat contracted. In these, you actually see the full word se'amara. Hayarokwe se'amara is 4 tens for 40. Mo'oveka se'amara is 5 tens for 50. And you can go on all the way up to 100 where they say se'amata, which is 100. Which also seems like it might be related to se'amara 10 and se'ama 1, and I think it might be, but I can't explain it further. So there's a lot of system to Comanche numbers. Let me just depart from Oklahoma languages for 1 minute, because there's another interesting example I'd like to show you from the language I wrote my dissertation on, which is a California Indian language. This California language is called Kitanemuk, or sometimes it's pronounced Kitanamuk to make it sound more English-like. It's a California language that is now extinct. When I wrote my dissertation, it was entirely on old field notes from written records of the language. And I just sifted out whatever I could and made up a dictionary and a grammar of what could presently be known about Kitanemuk based on the surviving records, which are only written records. Anyway, this language is a member of the Uto-Aztecan language family, just as Comanche is. So you may notice a few similarities if you have a good memory. Haukup, the number for 1, is quite distinct from Sema in Comanche. But we have Wo, which is, you can kind of see just from the spelling, which is a phonetic kind of spelling, that it's probably related in some way to Wahat, the Comanche word for 2, Pahita in Comanche, Pahi in Kitanemuk, and so forth. So there are quite a few similarities, but let me just read through them. Haukup, Wo, Pahi, Watsa, Mahach, Pavahi, Quatskaveka, Wahawatsa, Makaveka, and We Mahach. That takes us from 1 through 10. Now, there are a couple of interesting things we can say about these numbers under 10. Mahach is not exactly the word for hand as it was in Comanche, but it looks awfully similar, and I think it must have some distant historical relationship. Mahach is 5, and Mats is hand. They're very similar. What else can I tell you? This word Pavahi, remember we noticed a surprising thing that in Comanche, 3 and 6 seem to be related numbers, and that certainly is true in Kitanemuk. It's even that much more obvious. If you take off this initial syllable, the PA of 6, you have VAHI, which again it's not surprising given how the sound system of Comanche works that this P would show up as a V sometimes within a word. So it's as if you were saying Pahi, but kind of stuttering on the first syllable, and there's a technical name for this kind of stuttering on the first syllable, which is called reduplication. It's a process that's used in some languages to form plurals or words of related meaning to the base word. So it seems like the base word here is Pahi, and the reduplicated or sort of stuttered form with the extra syllable Pavahi is the word for 6. So the language seems to be saying that in the world 3 and 6 seem to us to be related. And so 6 is twice 3, of course, and why this language happens to seem to focus on 3 more than, say, English does is impossible to say, but it's a really interesting thing to think about. Now, I was saying 7, 8, and 9 are sometimes sort of inexplicable but long numbers. This is the case where 7 and 9 are. And, I don't know, I can't tell you any more about them except that they don't seem to break down, and they're very long words for the language, so they must have historically had some actual meaning, but I don't know what it is. If you look at 8, you'll find a very similar relationship between 8 and 4, as we saw a minute ago, between 6 and 3, and of course 8 is twice 4. The number for 4 is Watsa, and the number for 8 is Wahawatsa, which is again a kind of reduplication. The first syllable of that Watsa, the word for 4, is kind of stuttered on with an extra little syllable in there, but that's something that happens in Kitanemuk, that you get these longer reduplicated forms. So the language seems to say, well, we go 1 through 4, then maybe there's something related to hand, and then we start building numbers on the previous numbers, at least in the case of the 6 and the 8. And then finally the word for 10, we mahach. This we is clearly historically related to this wo, which means 2. So in effect, you're saying for 10, you're saying 2 5s. So at first it looks like it's kind of based on 5, and yet at the same time it kind of looks like the system is based on 3. And it'll get even more interesting when we look at some of the teens numbers. 11 through 15 in Kitanemuk are pronounced, I got lazy here because the beginning is the same in each case. They're pronounced we mahach hamak haukup, we mahach hamak wo, we mahach hamak pahia, we mahach hamak watsa, and we mahach hamak mahach. And what we're literally saying there, this we mahach is the word for 10. So again, we're building our teens on 10 like so many languages do, although in this case 10 itself is built on 5. So it's kind of interesting. But we're saying 10 again or more. Hamak means again or more. 1. 10 again 2. 10 again 3. 10 again 4. 10 again 5. And so that's how you do your teens, and it goes on up through 19. There is a little, I put a little star here because there's an extra little glitch to 12. It's strange when you're not able to consult with native speakers on things because the language is already extinct. It's not only sad, but it's frustrating in terms of trying to do an analysis. But in these written notes I was working with, I came across 2 different forms for the number 12. One was this we mahach hamak wo, meaning 10, and then again 2 more. Another form I found was this one, bahi watsa, for 12. So apparently some speakers use one form and some the other, perhaps. This bahi watsa goes back to the theme of basing things on 3, because bahi is 3, watsa is 4. 3 times 4 equals 12. So pahi watsa is one way of saying 12 in this language. Pretty interesting. And then finally, when you get to the decades in Kitanemuk, again, it's very regular, as it has been in all these languages we've looked at so far. Pretty much once you get the hang of it, you can give any of these numbers up through 99. 20 is wohea we mahach, meaning 2 times. This hea suffix makes it be times. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times 10 is what you're saying. Wohea we mahach. 2 times 10 is 20. Bahia we mahach. 3 times 10 is 30, and so forth. And then when you want to say, for instance, 21, you can say wohea we mahach, and then follow this pattern, hamak halkup. That would be 21, which is quite a mouthful in this language, and yet it's very easy to learn because it's extremely consistent and logical. There's a real system to it. Let's come back to Oklahoma now. I'm sorry we don't have Gus Palmer Jr. or someone here to pronounce these Kiowa words for us. I'll do the best I can. In Kiowa, let me just read through the numbers 1 through 10 first. And I took a Kiowa class from Gus once, so I once knew how to pronounce things a little better than I do now. But my point is I didn't get very far with it, so I'm sure there's more that could be said about these numbers than I know. But I wanted to just show you the written form so you can see again that there is some system to it at least. 1 through 10. Pago, yi, pao, yika, onto, sorry, that's one of those great Kiowa consonants, onto, moso, pansen, the underlining represents some nasalization in Kiowa, yatsen, gotsen, and gokin. Now, I don't see a lot of things that obviously to me are related here. 6 doesn't look like 3, 10 doesn't look like 5. 4 looks a little like 2, and that does sometimes happen in languages, that 4 being the doubling of 2 will look somewhat similar. I don't know if that's what's going on in Kiowa, but it could very well be because that sometimes happens in languages. There's one interesting thing here. If you look at 7 through 9, they all end in the same syllable. And yet this first syllable, I don't quite see how it would relate to any of these smaller numbers or anything, so I'm not sure what's going on here, but there is some system that I'm sure a young child learning to speak Kiowa will have an easier time learning these 3 because there's something they have in common, and whatever is being said there, it's very parallel. Let's look at the teens. We have paton, yiton, paoton, yatsatan, ontotan. Pardon me, Gus and all Kiowa speakers. But I think you can see just looking at the spelling there's something going on here. Pago and paton. So there's that ga part is missing here, but there's a beginning like 1 and then an extra element, the ton. And there's a beginning like 2, yi, and the extra element, ton. So I don't know, somehow this ton syllable seems to be representing 10, and yet it's not pronounced the same as the word for 10. It might mean something like on top. 1 on top, 2 on top, 1 beyond, sort of in the strategy that Comanche used. Then we can look at the decades, and we'll see yikin, baokin, yatsakin, and that final syllable there, that kin, which is in common between those, also occurs on the number for 10. So in some sense, this kin syllable seems to indicate multiples of 10. 1 multiple of 10, or 2 or 3 or 4, and so forth. Further evidence that this tan syllable means 1 beyond or 1 more or 1 on top or something like that can be seen in the more complex numbers when you get like 31, 47, and so forth. 31 is paokin, paton. So it's 30, like here, 30, and then 1 on top of it. So, it's not equal to 30 plus 11, 41, but paokin, paton means 30 and 1 beyond it, or words to that effect. So that's 31. And you go on, I think, parallel to the teens through each of these decades, as you say, 37, 8, 9, and so forth. And then they have a special word for 100, gadokin. I think I left off a low pitch mark there probably. But you can see that this word for 100 looks similar to the word for 10. It may be related to this word for 1, even though that has a G instead of the C, but they're both velar sounds, K and G type sounds, which are very similar. So there may be a relation between 100, 10, and 1, as there was in Comanche, which is interesting because they're not at all closely related languages. They're supposed to be related, but pretty distantly. Let's look at Creek very briefly. We're running a little lower on time than I'd like, and I would be embarrassed to pronounce too much of these Creek words anyways, because I've never studied Creek and I'm not too good at it. But you can see the numbers 1 through 10 look mostly different from each other. They all almost end in this en, some consonant followed by en. There's probably something to that. It might be like in Comanche where you have a kind of verbal ending on the numbers, I'm not sure. But then when these numbers between 5 and 10 come up, you see that they all have this syllable pak before the end. So it's ipakin, kulapakin. Pardon me, I better not pronounce anymore because I'm probably butchering this. But you can see that there's something in common there because the spelling here is phonetically based. It does represent similarities when you see similar spellings. When you get into the teens, these all start with this balin word, which clearly is the same as the word for 10. So we're saying 10, probably something like 10, pumpkin, dalakin, probably something like 10, one on top of it, 10, two on top of it, and so forth, although don't quote me, but there's clearly something of that kind of patterning going on. And in the decades, they all start with bale, which looks like it's related to 10. So this is a 110 kind of number. It kind of ends in the en, which is maybe a bit contracted that the second e got dropped. And here it doesn't end in that. Instead, it gets one of the other basic numbers, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, added to it to form 20, 30, 40, and 50. So they're all very logical. There's slightly different systems in each language. But like so much in language, they're basically very regular. It's just that they're regular in different ways from English in some cases, and it makes us think they're not regular or they're strange or something, but they aren't any stranger than English, of course. Here's Ponca. I think I can pronounce these. Oui, namba, labade, duba, satan, chape, peidamba, pelabade, shanka, and gdeban. I've been briefly a student of Ponca, but I can't tell you too much about these at all. We don't see a lot of similarities in these first 10 numbers, but you can see that these two numbers, 7 and 8, start with the same first syllable, this pe part, pe, lamba, and pe labade, and they seem to correspond at least partially to namba and labade. So the pe syllable here seems to represent 5, even though it's not the same as the number 5. It either means, like, I don't know what it means exactly, but in effect it seems to be saying 5 and 2, 5 and 3, but only those two numbers work that way. So again, it's interesting, and I don't have a record of the teens and decades in Ponca, but since we're running out of time, I guess that's okay. Let's look at just probably one more language, which is Cherokee. It's another one I've studied very, very briefly, so pardon my pronunciation, real Cherokee speakers. By the way, each of these Cherokee numbers has both a short and a long form, from what I understand. Where you see letters there in parentheses, these are, it's usually on the end of the word. These are letters that are commonly dropped by some speakers or in more rapid speech or something. So I'll try to pronounce these. I'm looking for my notes here on the short pronunciation, sort of like the short pronunciations that I've heard. They won't sound like they have exactly as many letters as these written forms, but they are the same word. So 1 through 10 would be sawo, tal, jo, nuk, hisk, sudal, galkwok, janela or janel, sonela or sonel, and sko or skohi. Again, I don't have the higher numbers here. I've had such a very minor dabbling in Cherokee. I'm sorry we don't have a Cherokee speaker to explain more of this. But being in the ignorance that I'm in, I must say I don't see any similarities in any of these 10 numbers, which makes us think again of the English language, where all 10 of the first 10 digits seem to be quite distinct from each other, as far as I can tell. And I don't know if any of them mean anything like in a row or hand or anything like that. I can't tell you. But it's interesting that, unlike so many of the languages we just looked at, they seem to have 10 very individual words for all the first 10 digits. So, let me try to give a little worldwide perspective on this before we close out the topic. And I have to give a little thank you to the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Linguistics for this information. They had a nice little section on number systems. Here's some of what they said. They cited a number of interesting examples from around the world, and I'd like to make you aware of some of them so you can kind of think of what you've just heard about Oklahoma languages against that background. They say several languages have very few words for numerals. This we haven't been seeing tonight, but this is in fact true in the world. For instance, Australian Aboriginal languages often have just a few very general words such as all, many, few, one, and two. In other words, the numbers don't go beyond 2. I've heard people telling tasteless jokes about, oh, those people must only have 2 fingers or something. But clearly we've seen systems that seem to be based on 5, which relates to the hand, on 3, and other kinds of relationships. Obviously, it doesn't have anything to do with the people's bodies or how they see their bodies. It has something to do with their mental, cognitive organization of the world and of mathematics, I guess you could say. And in fact, other tasteless things have been said along the line of, well, if you only have a numbers through 2 or numbers through 5 or something, how can you ever do math, or how can you understand numbers that, say, European languages have? In fact, in Australia, it's a very good example of people who have spoken a lot of different indigenous languages with very few words, and yet they have absolutely no trouble mastering counting in English or understanding what it means or doing math or anything else. It's quite easy for them to do, just as it is for any of us. They point out that English counts in tens, so that 41, for instance, is really sort of saying 4 tens, 1. Welsh counts in a mixture of tens and 20s, so that 20 is pronounced, I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's a certain word, ugain, I'm going to say, I'm probably saying it completely wrong. 30 is degar hugain, which is 10 on 20. 40 is 2 20s. 50 is 2 20s with 10 on it. So there's this kind of important role for 20 that we haven't seen yet. French is another very well-known language that it uses 20 in some of its numbers, only a very few, but the French number for 80 is 80, which means 4 20s, and 90 is 90, 4 20s and 10. So the 80s and 90s make use of this 20 base in French. In Old Hawaiian, the Cambridge Dictionary Encyclopedia tells us, they used the number 40 as a counting unit, so that 50 literally meant 40 plus 10. 968 was 2 400s and 4 40s and 8. It sounds incredibly complex, but it really is just different. Some number systems, they point out, involve counting backwards in some of their numbers. So in English, 199 is, you're saying 190 and 9. It's an additive thing. But in Yoruba, which is a language of Africa, the translation for 199 comes out as actually meaning 200 less 1. Just as in Comanche, we saw that 9 was, they seem to be saying, it means 1 lacking. They seem to be saying 10 minus 1. So this sometimes happens. They're giving me the wrap it up sign. So they also claim in the encyclopedia that some languages have no number system. That's kind of a fascinating fact. But anyway, we've only looked at a small sampling of Oklahoma languages, but we see some of these general principles illustrated. And it's interesting that the languages do not all handle numbers in the same way by any means, and yet they're all very regular, very language-like, very systematic and consistent, which is one of the things that makes languages so learnable, is that they don't have a different word for every number. Hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join us next time on Wordpath. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene madaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene